around video. So
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome, James.
thanks, Nina.
So
How are
good
you?
to have you here for this live event that we're streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
triple cast. Yeah,
Yes.
that's something. Yeah, that's happy to be here. This is I enjoyed our conversation last time. I'm looking forward to this one as well.
Yes. Yes. And so just to let folks know that we'll be touching on 2 or 3 things in this 20-minute or so conversation. But if they want to go deeper or learn more about your work, the current episode of Let's Get Real is a great place to find that. And we'll send a link out via in the comments after we finish this. So I know that tell folks a little bit about your work and what you were up to this summer.
Yeah, sure. So, like my 9 to 5 is I'm a consultant. I've done consulting work with the Big Four for a number of years. Big Four and other groups. Um, all over the space too. I mean, it's some in strategy consulting, but most of my career has been around sustainability. Sustainability and ESG in some capacity. Currently, like some of my side work that I'm doing right now. Again, they'll hear more about this in your latest episode of Let's Get Real. I'm exploring and trying to gain better understanding of the impact of climate change and biodiversity loss on indigenous communities and those communities who are the most remote in our world. I'm traveling to them. It's something I've been doing, on my own time for most of my career, honestly, since I started with the United Nations. But yeah, I travel to the communities and I speak with the locals and the indigenous leaders, and gain a better understanding of how climate change is impacting their community, and what their thoughts are for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love and I love what you are up to because two of my highest values are inclusion and equity, kind of in one bucket, and being good stewards or being leaders in the world, leadership, and the idea that we are all leading somewhere in our lives, and sometimes it's through our work during the day, and oftentimes it's other projects that we want to do that help us feel a sense of purpose. And so I was just so intrigued when I found out originally about not only your work in sustainability at BDO, but even more interesting for me was that you go out to these indigenous groups and do research and interview and find out what's happening for people in their communities. And I think the leadership application for me, because I just got back from a 3 days with a client, an organizational client, and I just was noticing again at how abstract leadership can feel sometimes, and how I think that the more we can get kind of close in on these issues and really listen to what's happening on the ground and watch and observe and learn from people, the more effective we are in our roles and in our roles as stewards, if you will.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, during the podcast, I referenced going to the Gemba,
Yeah.
and that is a Six Sigma term, which kind of means, go to the ground level to see. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but you go to the ground level and see how things are really happening. And
Yeah.
for me, that's very much what this is. It's
Mhm.
it's kind of a way to kind of see what the impact is of the work that we're trying to promote.
Yes.
Yeah, and, we mentioned the insights and metrics and numbers and storytelling, and like we go into more detail on that during the episode. But it really kind of adds the emotive side to the business decisions and the storytelling component to business decisions, that is so needed, I think, from just metrics and data driven insights. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very
Well, and
powerful.
when it comes to climate change, like I don't think a day goes by anymore. Definitely a week goes by where we don't hear about a weather event somewhere in the world that's impacting, or an earthquake or something, whether it's sadly what just happened in Morocco,
Yeah,
and the flooding I just was hearing about, and people dying from that, right? And so that can create a lot of hopelessness or just pessimism, and it can keep us from feeling like we have agency, right? And so I'm really curious, like when you went to Tajikistan and visited those nomadic indigenous groups there, Like, what were you learning? What did you take away from being with them about their adaptability, or about how they're being affected by climate change?
Yeah, in Tajikistan, or in Bhutan, the other trip,
Mhm.
my second most recent trip I
Yes.
took here, and
Yes.
also really not just those two. These are
Mhm.
commonalities that I see amongst all the
Mhm.
groups that I visit. They possess, and I probably we all do at some level, but they possess an enormous amount of resilience.
Mhm.
Resilience and adaptability.
Mhm.
Because I think they're so connected with their land. They're like the interconnection. Again, they don't see land and the sea and the flora, the fauna themselves. They don't see it as separate entities per se. I mean, at some level, sure, but they understand the connection between them all.
Yeah.
Even their culture and religion even pays into that at some level. Their
Yeah.
strategies, born from this deep knowledge, it's always been about resilience. So there, and this I think leads to their adaptability. It can include adjusting hunting and fishing seasons, adapting new agricultural practices, moving settlements, in response to changing environmental conditions. Like in Tajikistan, that is some of those are some of the themes, I guess I could say that I saw. Some of the migration patterns for the groups and their livestock themselves have been changing. They're going to
Yeah.
areas where at one time were fertile are no longer fertile. Now they're going to other areas that
Mhm.
are fertile now. So some
Got it.
changing migration patterns. Um, Agropastoral, mostly around agropastoralism. There's where the changes exist.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. And I just, again, that metaphor of, I mean, there's the reality of it as well, but as a leadership coach, I'm also struck by the metaphorical implications of it. So, um, that connection to the land. I know when during the pandemic, I was introduced to Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is an amazing writer here in the United States, Indigenous or Native American writer. And she writes so beautifully about our connection to nature, and how the Indigenous experience is, they do feel like we're of nature, which I think is accurate even scientifically. Like, we are nature, but
So,
because of our big brains that we've developed over time, we've decided that we can actually impose and shape nature everywhere, and we've forgotten that we are at our best when we are connected and responding to what's happening in the natural world and being a part of it.
yeah, it's going back to interconnectedness. It's realizing that we are all part of the same whole, and I don't mean culturally across the world. We're
Yeah.
I don't mean just simply that we're related to the yak herder in Bhutan or the yak herder in the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Region in Tajikistan. It's our businesses are related to the environment. So again, not just the flora, the fauna, the people, but businesses, our actions, we do, the houses that we build, everything is part of the ecosystem, the global
Yes.
ecosystem. And you're right. I think we have become somewhat removed from that. And for me, that's part of the value I get. Again, there's tremendous value in it, but a small part of the value I get in that is a reminder that we are all interconnected. When I go there,
Mm.
and the people who live it as part of their day to day, as part of their lived experience, and so not they are inseparable from it. It's a
Yeah.
reminder for me to kind of try to keep that connection. So
Yes, yes.
yeah,
And it can be really simple shifts that I think are already actually happening. Some organizations are doing it more quickly than others. Some businesses are doing it more quickly than others. But when I think about this idea of business as being nested in the environment rather than a separate entity, which is really an illusion, right? Because anytime you try to travel and the weather has an impact on your travel, you recognize we are so dependent on Mother Nature. Uh,
absolutely.
Viewing our the people we're responsible to, or the entities we're responsible to, as our stakeholders rather than our shareholders. Even just the companies
Mhm.
that can make that shift from who are our stakeholders, including the environment that we're having an impact on, and the animals that we're having an impact on, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do you go ahead? You were going to say something.
No, I was just kind of elaborating on your point, just more colorful commentary is all. Sorry.
No, that's great. No, it's so great to have you here. So you take your motorcycle on these trips, which
Yeah.
actually is, I think, wonderful, because it reminds me that we can have joy even as we're doing these explorations, that it doesn't always have to be serious. And I know that it's also practical for you to take your motorcycle, but um, tell me how does that work? Like, how do you get your motorcycle over to some of these places?
Oh yeah, well, so I mean, the practicality part of it, it really kind of is a boondoggle. I mean, there is truth to it. It is practical, but it's just being fun. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It's just fun to ride.
Okay. Well, we should have joy in our activism, I think.
But I don't take my motorcycle to these places oftentimes.
Okay.
In the United States, I do, but oftentimes I'll go and I'll procure a bike there, whether I rent it or some other
Yeah.
way. But usually I
Okay.
use a bike there. Yeah, it's just, I mean, if I'm doing a true around the world trip, like to where I don't stop, I don't work, I'm just literally driving around the world, that would be different. But,
Yeah.
I have, I have a 9 to 5, so as part of the 9 to 5, I have time constraints. So
Right. Of
you have to make.
course. Of course. That totally makes sense. So,
But the other part of that though too, the bike that I have wouldn't be practical everywhere.
mhm.
I live in the United States, so I have a kind of a bigger bike. It's a 1200. It's a Triumph Scrambler XE. Wouldn't be very practical where I was just at in Tajikistan. The bike I
Yeah.
rode there was a 250, which is a much smaller bike. And it was perfect for there. Really easy to
Yeah.
handle, felt like a mountain bike with a motor, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh, fun.
there's strategy to having the right bike also.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So, so tell us what's your aspiration? Where do you want to go next?
Oh well, I mean, the next trip that I am taking, I'll be in Reykjavik, Iceland, in the
Mm,
middle of October for a convention called the Arctic Circle Assembly, and it's a policy convention, that convenes some of the states, the states in the Arctic Circle, of course, so up front,
yeah.
Northern Europe, Alaska, Canada, Russia, they all have constituents there, but it also carries a fairly large indigenous contingency, from those
Mm,
states. An opportunity
yeah.
for me to go there and work with a lot of groups at once and kind of get some more information. It's not in their environment. I understand that, but the conversation's there and everyone's in one spot, so that's it. But as far as like
Yeah.
my next trip, like to where I'm going, I don't know yet. It's
All right.
it'll come probably in early 2024 at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even you just telling me about the trip to Iceland has me curious about like what's the geopolitical impact of like the war in Ukraine on an event like that when you have Russia and Alaska and Iceland and the Scandinavian countries all in the same room together? Is it because it's scientists and ESG folks that it doesn't matter, or how does that all
No,
work?
I mean it'll be some science. But it'll be a lot of also policy folks as well. This will be the first time I've gone to this event, so I can't speak for this,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I do know that there will be representatives from all those areas there.
Yeah.
There are talks specifically related to China's involvement in the Arctic and Russia's
Mm.
involvement in the Arctic. With both Chinese and Russian representatives there. So it'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to this event.
Yeah, yeah, it does sound interesting, and it sounds like a place where we could have some common ground. But I also know that in Russia, they're still heavily dependent on our demand for oil, and also that must be tricky. So,
Yeah.
I don't envy the policymakers, honestly, and on all of this. It's just it's mind boggling. We're definitely stepping into the unknown, and I just returned from a David White retreat, and it was just a reminder to me that the unknown is part of what we need to be able to just be with right now, right? And how do we come to ground, be centered, and be with the questions, because we don't have answers yet for these big issues, and it's easy to get complacent or decide to, or even just try to take shortcuts and try to find the easy
Yeah,
answers.
and frankly, we may not even have the questions yet. I mean, we may not
Right.
know the right questions to even ask yet. So that's why when we're talking about these things, I really stress openness, and tolerance,
Yeah.
because we have different cultural backgrounds, wherever you're from, even if you're from
Yeah.
two places in the same country, you have different cultural backgrounds, so be open to opposing viewpoints, you know.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's important. So, what's your advice for sustainability leaders right now around everything that's happening in the world? I know that's a question I'm springing on you in the moment, but do you have any? What are your thoughts on that based on the work you've been doing,
like
James?
in what context? You mean like towards climate change or just as an approach? You mean?
I think as a in terms of being effective as leaders and bringing in, well, our focus was on how do we learn from Indigenous experience as we
Right.
dive into these things and not be too separated from that. Yeah.
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think, again, in the West, I can speak for, because I'm a Western scientist, so I can speak
Yes.
for my group in the West. We oftentimes think at a very macro level, and again,
Mhm.
a lot of, going back to the insights and the data driven insights, we think at that level quite a bit. It
Yeah.
is important to consider alternative perspectives and alternative knowledge bases as we
Yeah.
go into our decision making. One of the great things about traditional ecological knowledge, I think that we often overlook in the West. It's changing slightly, but I think we often overlook it in the
Yeah.
West. One of the great things about it is how proximal it is. I mean, so
Mm.
it's really, it's not just local. Sometimes it's even hyper local. But the knowledge they have of these areas goes back eons. So
Yes.
with that knowledge, it's not a far stretch to think that there could be innovations developed from that could be extrapolated beyond just that hyperlocal community,
Mm.
to the greater community, maybe even to a larger climate solution. But
Yeah.
we got to get to the table. We have to learn more about it. We have to talk to people from these communities and gain a better understanding of how they've approached it, for thousands of years, because climate's always
Yes.
changing. It's just
Yes.
accelerating right now. But they've been doing it for a long time, so they've developed the resilience that I think can lead to some of those innovations.
Yes, yes. The resilience, the adaptability. And then let's not forget, I bet you've heard of this term, seven generation
Sure.
thinking.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like not only do they have all of this base of knowledge and wisdom we can draw from, but I think in many of these, I would assume it's a common thread for most Indigenous folks is that they're also thinking generationally into the future. And I was just again with some business leaders with a client, and there was a big conversation about making business decisions that are 5, 7, 10 years out. And I would have never heard that even 2 years ago. It was always quarterly, always focused on the most immediate business impact. But to actually be thinking well into the future. And of course, 7 generations is like, what are your grandchildren's grandchildren? What
Yeah,
kind of earth will they be living on? I mean, that's quite a way to be thinking about
it is.
strategy and
I
decision
believe it
making.
was Iroquois. I mean, I'm not 100% on that, but it,
Yes,
it, it is a native. I believe it
right.
was an Iroquois practice. Thinking that no decisions would be made. At the council, no decisions would be made unless it is beneficial for 7 generations from now. If
Yeah.
we do not know it's going to be beneficial for those generations, we're not going to do it. And you're right. I do see organizations starting to think more long-term planning. The challenge is, and especially like with a private company who's
Yeah.
in the startup space, they're backed usually by PE firms and some private equity firms.
Mhm.
Who are looking really for a quicker return on their investment. You know,
Right.
so yeah, so we're talking like 3 years. Sometimes a long one would be 5 years. And so
Right.
because we're kind of steeped into that mindset, oftentimes we don't necessarily make long-term strategy plans,
Mm.
for financing. But again, that's changing. I think
Yeah.
with the ESG is hoping to change that a little bit, because we're starting to see greater value in non-financial materiality rather than just simple financial materiality for investors. So
Yeah.
that's going into the equation now a lot more.
Got it. Got it. That's so interesting. And again, it's that tension, right? It's not about right or wrong, black and white, but how do we enter that gray zone, right? Where
Totally.
we can include the short term, but be planning, and we it just seems so essential that we start thinking more long term on many of these issues.
It,
So
it really does, and again, there are PE firms now who are investing solely in green organizations, and organizations who have trajectories, toward a greater environmental or a social good.
yeah.
So and we're seeing that a lot. I mean, it's almost becoming the norm now. It's
Yeah.
almost, yeah. So that it's changing for
It's
the better.
giving me hope. I'm feeling hopeful on a Friday, which I
There's a lot
appreciate.
to hope for. There's a lot to hope for.
Yeah.
I think the climate community, folks who are interested in sustainability, I think there's a lot of optimism. I mean, it's going to take an enormous effort. We all know that,
Yes.
but
Yes.
we can do it. I mean, humans as a species are resilient. So
Yes.
we'll figure it out.
Right. So as we close out, I know that next week is Climate Week in New York City, and that you plan to go. And what are you most looking forward to about being at that convention or a conference?
Oh man, yeah. So Climate Week, it's crazy in New York. And there's events going on all over the city. So it's really
Mm,
like sustainability world just kind of convenes in New York. So for me, what I'm looking forward to is, again, being in a course consortia of like-minded professionals, and kind of sharing thought to kind of see where the industry is going, to see where sustainability is going, and
yes.
try to identify any needs of trajectory shifts. What are
Yeah.
we not doing right? Where should we be changing? What should we be focusing on? So just kind of engaging in that discourse, I think, and kind of furthering the practice, I think, is what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you are doing that as well in your own work, in your own way, and using your creativity and your storytelling to and you've got a book that's coming and you've done a documentary. So anything else you want folks to know about your work before we close out?
No, just James Fountain. Sorry, james-fountain.com is my website. You'll see everything I'm doing there. But yeah, it's an area that I'm really deeply involved in, deeply passionate about. So I welcome any conversations or feedback. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn or the website.
That's wonderful, James. And thanks for being willing to experiment with me. I'm new to the LinkedIn Live and the live streaming, but it was a great conversation and I love learning through conversation. That's one of my favorite things. So
Me too. I enjoyed it again. These conversations are great. Thank you for inviting me.